and the son of Jesse, once again, won't even call him his name, conspired against me, and that you have given him bread and his sword, and have inquired of God for him, so that he would rise up against me by lying in ambush as it is this day. So Saul is kind of a paranoid schizophrenic here. Paul is, he's decided David's going to kill him, which David never does, never will do, never conspires to do. Laying in ambush, there's no reason for Saul to think this is the case, but yet he's propagating this theory, and Saul he's going to persecute these priests who had no idea what was going on, and he's losing the confidence of the Israelites and the people around him, as God probably intended. You know, to the Israelites, the priests were the priests of God. When you attack the priests, you basically attacked God. So the Edomite, he doesn't care. The Edomite's not an Israelite. The Edomite could care less. To him, the priests are just another man. It doesn't mean anything to him. So the Edomite, he's going to go and he's going to do this. Amalek answered and he said, who among all your servants is as faithful as David? The priest is going to make about 3 points here. And the first one he's going to make is he goes, why would I think David was up to anything wrong? Who's more faithful than David? David's the leader of your people. He's went out and fought your battles. You know, we don't know that you and David are at odds, right? He's your son-in-law, right? He's not only a faithful leader in your army, he's not always the guy who goes out and fights for you, the captain of your guard. He's your son-in-law, right? And is honored in your house. So the first couple things he says is, number one, he's in your army. Number two, he's in your household. Number three, he's your son-in-law. So there's 3 things. He says, why should I think anything wrong? And then he says, and also in his defense, this is not anything new. I've done this before for David. This isn't a new thing. David's come to inquire of the Lord before, which speaks highly of David. And he says, did I just begin to inquire of God for him today? Far be it from me. Do not let the king impute anything to his servant or to any of the household of my father, for your servant knows nothing at all of this whole affair. But the king says, you shall surely die, and all your father's household. So this is the fulfillment of that prophecy. These are Eli's descendants. So this is the fulfillment of that prophecy, that none of his sons, none of them would live to an old age, as God had said, and this is going to be a fulfillment. So Saul pronounces judgment. Not a just judgment. You can see that. Very unjust. He was wrong in what he did. He should have never condemned the priest for what the priest did, because the priest was unaware. The priest was ignorant of the whole affair, as he says. But Saul says, no, you're going to die. Well, that's not a smart move. Saul's not making a lot of smart moves now, because the Israelites that are with him, the guards attending him, he says, put him to death. But because their hands with David and because they knew he was fleeing, did not reveal it to me. But they didn't know any of that. And the servants of the king were not willing, because they were priests. So, you know, the king has lost his authority here. He's lost the respect of his people. You know, if they wanted to put him to death, they're going to value that priest's life over the command of King Saul. And it really goes back to what the Bible says, right? When Peter is in there in the book of Acts, and they tell him, they go in and they command him, they say, don't preach about Jesus anymore. And Peter basically says, who should we follow? Who should we listen to? Should we listen to you, or should we listen to God? Well, they made that choice, didn't they? Peter, we know the answer to that. Peter says, I have to do what God tells me to do. Paul says, submit yourselves to authority, submit yourselves to the government, submit yourselves to who's in authority. But you and I, up to the point that conflicts God, we need to do that. But if there comes a point where that conflicts God, then we need to stand on God's side. And regardless of what that entails, that's what we need to do. I mean, that's just how it is. I'm an American, glad I'm American. But the truth is, if America asks me to do something that God doesn't allow, I'm sorry. My number one citizenship is in heaven, not in this country. And I'm going to do what God tells me to do. So, you know, there's a point you have to draw the line. And these men around Saul, they drew the line. These are priests. I don't care if you're the king. You're only the king because God made you the king, right? I mean, that's the only reason you're the king, because God did it. And now you want us to strike down the priests of God. Not going to do that, right? Not going to do that. So I think they made a really valiant stand in front of the king. You know, we're not going to do it. Are there any comments about that? Can't believe nobody's got a comment about that, but it's okay. It's okay. Maybe, possibly, right? How many people have fled their homeland because of religious persecution throughout history, right? A lot. A lot. So I think to think, well, that can't happen here, that's probably a bit naive. So absolutely, absolutely it can happen. But guess what? I don't know how you say his name. Tried with that. Doeg, dog. I like to call him dog. He's kind of a dog. You know what I mean? so I just call him Dog the Edomite. That's probably not how you pronounce that. It's probably Doeg or Dog or Doeg. But anyway, Doug the Edomite. That's just wrong. Doug's not a mean enough name. It's got to be like Dog or something, you know. Anyway, Doug the Edomite, Dog the Edomite. Anyway, he doesn't care. He's an Edomite. The Edomites don't really like the Israelites anyway. So he attacked him and he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. So he killed 85 priests that day because Saul was ignorant and schizophrenic and a little paranoid. And Saul was going to do this to wreak havoc. But in doing this, Saul was turning his own people against him because Saul was not a reliable and a true leader to his people. He struck Nob, so he didn't just kill the priests. He killed their families. He killed their oxen. He killed their donkeys. He killed their sheep. He did what he should have done to Ai, but he didn't do. But now he did it to his own people. When God sent him to fight Ai, and he says, kill everybody, and Samuel shows up, and he says, what's the bleating of the sheep I hear? Right? He should have done it to Ai, but he didn't. But now he did the exact thing to his own people. He utterly destroyed them. Utterly destroyed them. But the son of Amalek, the son of a tub named Abiathar, escaped, and he's going to come into play later on throughout the book of Samuel. He escaped and fled after David, and Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. And David said to Abiathar, I'm going to go with Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doug the Edomite, going with Kim on this, when Doug the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have brought about the death of every person in your father's household. Stay with me. So David basically throws the blame back on himself. David says, I should have killed him. You know, I knew better. I should have done something, and yet I didn't do it. Kind of goes back to what James says, right? To him who knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it, to him it's sin. You know, David knew this was going to be a bad thing. David knew he should have took action, yet David failed to do it. And so David kind of throws the blame back on there. But he says, stay with me. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life, and you're safe with me. So David really throws the blame back on himself. I should have done it, and I didn't, and now look what's happened. And look how Saul's got. And now stay with me because you're going to be safe with me. So you can kind of see in this lesson the demise. You see a lot of things, actually. You see the New Testament parallel of Jesus and the corn, and Jesus and David and the bread. You see that the David is starting to gain in popularity. His wisdom exceeds that of Saul. Saul, on the other hand, is going down a dark path. Saul's killing his own people. Saul's losing the respect of his men. Saul will not long after this lose his life. So, you know, Saul is decreasing here. David is still increasing in spite of Saul's best efforts. And you can kind of see God's hand at work in this whole process of bringing David to be a king. It's interesting. God didn't just anoint David king and say, now you're king. God didn't do that. God anointed David king, and he says, I'm going to take you through all this stuff to teach you to be a good king. And I think that's what David's doing here, or what God's doing with David. David's teaching him to lead, teaching him to take care of people, teaching him to make decisions, teaching him to be the person that he needs to be, so that when eventually he does become king of Israel, he's going to be able to do that and be a good king and not a king like Saul. Are there any other comments before we close? Good to see you, young lady. How you feeling? I seen you walking. That's a big thing, isn't it? That's another one of those things we take for granted, like walking till we can't do it. Yeah. So good to see you this morning. I'm glad you're healthy. Anyway, if there's any other comments, all right, we'll see y'all in just a few minutes.